Hi, my friend. Let me ask you something real quick. What if everything you've been told about winning in life is actually backwards? I'm serious. Most of us grew up believing that success comes from grinding harder than everyone else, having some natural gift that others don't, or just catching the right breaks at the right time. But here's what I've learned after years of studying this stuff and watching people succeed and fail. That's not how it actually works. The real difference between people who keep winning and people who keep struggling, it's not about your circumstances. It's not about your IQ. It's not even about the resources you have access to. The real difference is how your brain is wired to handle everything that comes your way. Think about it like this. Two people can go through the exact same challenge, same obstacles, same opportunities, and one person comes out on top while the other one stays stuck. Why? Because their minds process reality differently. And here's the thing that nobody talks about. Your mind right now, it's running on old software. Seriously, your brain is still using an operating system that was designed thousands of years ago when our biggest problem was not getting eaten by wild animals. That system was brilliant for survival, but it's absolutely terrible for success in the modern world. And most people never realize this. They're trying to build an empire with a brain that's still programmed to just stay safe and comfortable. In this audiobook, I'm going to show you how to completely upgrade your mental software. You're going to learn the exact thinking patterns that high achievers, entrepreneurs, and people at the top of their game use to consistently win. This isn't some fluffy motivation stuff or fake positivity. This is real science backed by psychology, neuroscience, and actual results from people who've done it. By the time we're done, you won't just think differently. You'll be operating at a level that most people around you can't even comprehend. Your mind is about to become your secret weapon. Chapter 1. Installing your victory operating system. Right now, your brain is running on default settings. And those default settings? They weren't built for the life you want. They were programmed by evolution for one single purpose, keeping you alive when everything was trying to kill you. Your mental software is optimized for three things: avoiding danger, saving energy, and staying accepted by the group. Those priorities made perfect sense when we lived in caves, but they're the exact things holding you back today. Here's the brutal truth. The mental patterns that kept your ancestors breathing are the same patterns keeping you average right now. Your brain's autopilot mode is literally sabotaging your potential every single day, and you probably don't even notice it happening. Let me break down how this default programming works against you. First, your brain prioritizes feeling safe today over achieving greatness tomorrow. It would rather keep you in your comfortable job that you hate than risk the uncertainty of starting something new, even if that new thing could change your entire life. Second, your brain is wired to spot problems, not opportunities. It's constantly scanning for what could go wrong, what's missing, what might hurt you. This negativity filter helped humans survive by staying alert. But it also means you're walking around focused on obstacles instead of possibilities. Third, your survival brain cares more about fitting in than standing out. It would rather have you blend into the crowd and be liked than take a stand that might make some people uncomfortable. The people who consistently win, they're running completely different mental software. I call it the victory operating system. And no, this isn't about forcing yourself to think positive or trying to fight your instincts with willpower. That never works long term. This is about understanding how your brain actually functions and deliberately installing new programming that's designed for achievement instead of just survival. The victory operating system has 5 core components that work together. Let me walk you through each one, because once you get these, everything changes. Component 1, results obsession. Most people focus on activities. They make to-do lists. They stay busy. They work hard. But here's what I've noticed. The people who actually win are obsessed with outcomes, not activities. They've trained themselves to think backwards from their goal. They don't ask, "What should I do today?" They ask, "What result am I trying to create, and what's the fastest route to get there?" This one shift eliminates probably 80% of the busy work that keeps average people spinning their wheels without making real progress. Think about your own life for a second. How much of your day is spent doing things that feel productive, but don't actually move you closer to what you really want? That's default programming. Results obsession reprograms you to be ruthless about only doing things that matter. Component 2, strategic paranoia. Now this might sound negative, but stay with me. Strategic paranoia doesn't mean being scared or pessimistic. It means your mind is constantly running scenarios about what could go wrong so you can handle it before it becomes a crisis. While other people are optimistically hoping everything works out, you're systematically preparing for every possible obstacle. This is why you navigate challenges that completely blindside everyone else. You already thought about it. You already planned for it. I learned this from watching a friend of mine who built 3 successful companies. He's the most positive guy you'll ever meet. But behind the scenes, he's always thinking 5 steps ahead about potential disasters. That's not negativity. That's strategic thinking. Component 3, leverage thinking. Here's where it gets interesting. Most people think in straight lines. If I work twice as hard, I'll get twice the results. If I want 10 times more, I need to work 10 times harder. That's linear thinking, and it's exhausting. People with victory operating systems think in leverage and multiplication. They're constantly asking questions like, how can I get 10 times the results without 10 times the effort? What's the one move that makes everything else easier or unnecessary? How can I use systems, other people's skills, and available resources to multiply my impact? This creates a completely different relationship with your time and energy. You stop trading hours for dollars. You start building systems that work whether you're there or not. Component 4, contrast awareness. Most people only compare themselves to the people right around them, their coworkers, their neighbors, their college friends, and if they're doing better than those people, they feel successful and stop pushing. That's a trap. People with upgraded mental software deliberately expose themselves to the absolute best in their field, and other fields too. They understand that your environment sets your standards, so they constantly seek out higher standards to prevent the complacency that kills growth. I remember when I first started intentionally studying people who were 10 levels above where I was. It was uncomfortable. It made me realize how much I didn't know. But that discomfort, that's the feeling of your standards upgrading in real time. Component 5. Anti-fragile adaptation. Most people try to avoid difficulties. They want smooth sailing, easy paths, no setbacks. But here's what the research shows. Systems that are protected from all stress become weak and brittle. Your muscles only grow when you stress them. Your immune system only gets stronger when it fights off challenges. Your mind works exactly the same way. People with victory operating systems don't just bounce back from obstacles. They get stronger from obstacles. Every failure becomes information. Every setback becomes training for their resilience. Every criticism becomes fuel for improvement. They're not just resilient, they're anti-fragile. Challenges literally make them better. Installing this new operating system isn't about becoming a different person. You're not changing your personality. You're upgrading the software your mind runs on, just like updating your phone gives you access to better features and performance. Upgrading your mental operating system gives you access to cognitive abilities that seemed impossible before. The process works through something called neuroplasticity. That's just a fancy word for your brain's ability to rewire itself throughout your entire life. Every thought you think, every decision you make, every action you take is either strengthening your existing mental patterns or creating new ones. Most people accidentally reinforce their limiting patterns because they're not paying attention to this process. But once you understand it, you can take conscious control. Here's the key insight that changed everything for me. Your brain doesn't know the difference between vividly imagining something and actually experiencing it. When you mentally rehearse yourself successfully handling a tough situation, your brain creates the same neural pathways as if you really lived through that success. This is why high performers spend significant time visualizing success scenarios while average people waste their mental energy worrying about failure scenarios. They're literally programming their brains for opposite outcomes. Chapter 2. Rewriting Your Belief System. Let's talk about beliefs for a minute. Your beliefs aren't just random opinions you picked up somewhere. They're the invisible instruction manual that controls what you notice, what you attempt, and what you think is even possible for someone like you. And here's the problem. Most people are walking around with beliefs that got programmed into them as kids or during emotional moments, and they've never questioned whether those beliefs are actually helping them win. I need you to understand this because it's huge. Your beliefs are creating your reality more powerfully than your actions. If you have limiting beliefs about what's possible for you, you'll unconsciously sabotage any action that would prove those beliefs wrong. Your brain will literally fight against your own success to maintain consistency with your beliefs. It's wild when you realize this is happening. Limiting beliefs work like invisible chains. They don't just stop you from taking action. They prevent you from even seeing opportunities that exist right in front of you. If you believe that people from my background don't get wealthy, your brain will filter out information about wealth building. It'll dismiss success stories as unrealistic. It'll find reasons why successful people are fundamentally different from you. This happens through something called the reticular activating system. It's the part of your brain that decides what information gets through to your conscious awareness. And it's programmed by your beliefs. Change your beliefs, and suddenly you'll start noticing possibilities that were there all along but invisible to you before. The most dangerous limiting beliefs are the ones that feel like facts. Beliefs like, I'm not good with numbers, I'm not a natural leader. Success requires sacrificing everything else in your life. These feel true because you can find evidence to support them. But here's what you need to understand. All beliefs are just interpretations of past experiences, and interpretations can be changed. The evidence you're using to support your limiting beliefs? It's highly selective. You're noticing the data that confirms what you already believe while completely ignoring data that contradicts it. This is called confirmation bias, and everyone does it. But once you know it's happening, you can start catching yourself. So, how do you actually change beliefs that have been running your life for years? I use a process I call belief archaeology. You dig up the belief, examine where it came from, question whether it's actually true, and install a better belief in its place. Step 1. Identify the belief by paying attention to your automatic thoughts when you face challenges. Thoughts like, that's impossible for me, I don't have what it takes, or that only works for other people are red flags that limiting beliefs are operating below your conscious awareness. Step 2. Trace the belief back to its origin. Most limiting beliefs formed during emotional moments when you were young, or during intense experiences where you made quick decisions about what these experiences meant about you. Maybe a teacher told you that you weren't creative. Maybe you failed at something important and decided you weren't capable. Maybe you watched your parents struggle and concluded that's just how life is. Step 3. Question the belief's validity. Ask yourself, is this belief absolutely true, or is it just one possible interpretation? What evidence contradicts this belief? What would be possible if this belief wasn't true? What would someone who has achieved what I want believe instead? This isn't about lying to yourself or forcing positive thoughts. It's about recognizing that beliefs are mental models, and mental models can be updated when you find better ones. Step 4. Install power beliefs to replace the limiting ones. Power beliefs are frameworks that expand your sense of what's possible and increase your capacity for action. Beliefs, like every challenge, is developing my skills. I can learn anything I commit to learning. My past doesn't define my future. There's always a solution if I'm committed enough. And I'm constantly evolving and improving. These aren't just affirmations you repeat mindlessly. They're operating principles that change how you interpret experiences and what actions you take in response to challenges. Here's how you make new beliefs stick. Beliefs become powerful when they're supported by emotional intensity and repetition. This is why traumatic experiences create strong limiting beliefs, and why motivational events create temporary empowering beliefs that fade after a few days. The emotion makes it stick. The repetition makes it permanent. So you create emotional intensity around your power beliefs by connecting them to what matters most to you. Don't just intellectually accept that challenges make you stronger. Emotionally connect that belief to your desire to provide for your family, lead your team, or accomplish your mission. Make it matter. Make it personal. Then reinforce those power beliefs through daily mental rehearsal and evidence collection. Spend time every day visualizing yourself successfully applying these beliefs in challenging situations. Keep a record of evidence that supports your empowering beliefs. Times when you learned something quickly, overcame an obstacle, achieved a goal you initially thought was impossible. This creates a positive feedback loop where power beliefs lead to confident action, which creates success, which provides more evidence for the power beliefs. The most sophisticated approach to belief change is understanding that beliefs exist in layers. Surface beliefs about specific situations are supported by deeper beliefs about your identity and capability, which are supported by core beliefs about reality and what's possible. Changing surface beliefs without addressing the deeper layers usually results in temporary change that doesn't last. But when you transform core beliefs about who you are and what you're capable of, surface beliefs change automatically. Let me give you an example from my own life. I used to believe I wasn't good at building relationships with influential people. That was a surface belief. Underneath that was a deeper belief that I didn't have anything valuable to offer people who were already successful. And underneath that was a core belief that my value came from what I could take from relationships rather than what I could give. Once I realized that core belief was running the show, I could change it. I started believing that everyone has something to teach and everyone has something to learn, including the most successful people. That core shift automatically changed how I showed up in every relationship. Chapter 3. Making decisions like your future depends on it. Let's talk about decision-making because this is where most people lose the game without realizing it. Most people make decisions reactively based on emotions, or they just copy what everyone else is doing, or they take the path of least resistance. They go with their gut. They follow conventional wisdom. They do what feels comfortable in the moment. This approach creates a random walk through life where success depends entirely on luck. But decisions are the steering wheel of your life. The quality of your decisions determines the quality of your outcomes more than your talent, more than your circumstances, more than anything else. And here's what blows my mind. Most people spend more time planning their vacation than planning the major decisions that shape their entire lives. Strategic decision-making starts with clarity about what you're actually optimizing for. Most people have never clearly defined what success means to them specifically, so they can't evaluate whether a decision moves them closer to or further from their goals. They make decisions based on what feels good right now, what avoids discomfort, or what other people expect them to do. Before you make any important decision, ask yourself these questions. What am I trying to achieve here? What would success look like in this specific situation? What are the possible outcomes of each option? And which outcomes align best with where I'm trying to go long term? This clarity prevents the trap of optimizing for the wrong variables. Most people optimize for comfort, approval, or immediate pleasure without realizing these things often conflict with their bigger goals. They choose the job that feels safe instead of the one that offers real growth. They avoid difficult conversations to keep the peace right now, even though those conversations would improve relationships long term. They spend money on things that provide instant gratification instead of investing in things that compound over time. Here's the framework I use for important decisions. I evaluate every option across multiple dimensions simultaneously. First, immediate impact. What are the short-term consequences of each option? What resources will this require? What are the risks and potential rewards in the next 30 to 90 days? Second, long-term trajectory. Where does this path lead if I continue down it for years? What skills, relationships, or assets will this help me build? How does this decision affect my ability to make even better decisions in the future? Third, opportunity cost. This is the one most people completely miss. What am I saying no to by choosing this option? What other possibilities am I closing off? Are there higher leverage opportunities I should pursue instead? Every yes is a no to something else. You need to know what you're giving up. Fourth, alignment with values and identity. Does this decision reflect who I want to be? Will I respect myself for making this choice? Does this move me toward or away from the person I'm becoming? This prevents decisions that create internal conflict or force you to act against what you actually believe in. The framework also includes systematic risk assessment. High performers don't avoid risk. They understand it and manage it strategically. They ask, what's the worst-case scenario and can I handle it? What's the probability of different outcomes? How can I structure this decision to limit downside while maximizing upside? What would need to be true for this to be the right choice? Most people either avoid all risk, which guarantees mediocrity, or they take reckless risks without proper analysis, which leads to preventable disasters. The smart approach is taking calculated risks where you've analyzed the probabilities, limited your downside exposure, and positioned yourself to benefit significantly if things go well. Here's something else that changed my decision-making completely. In complex situations, the best decision often isn't obvious from the start. Instead of trying to make perfect decisions with incomplete information, make the best decision possible with current information, then actively gather feedback and adjust based on results. This requires building strong feedback loops into your decision-making process. Effective feedback loops involve setting clear criteria for success before making the decision, establishing specific timelines for evaluation, and honestly assessing results without letting your ego distort your analysis. If a decision isn't producing expected results, pivot quickly instead of continuing down a path that isn't working just because you already committed to it. Also recognize that different types of decisions require different approaches. Reversible decisions with low consequences, make them quickly with minimal analysis. Irreversible decisions with high consequences, those deserve extensive research and careful consideration. Spend your decision-making energy proportionally. Make quick calls on small matters so you have mental bandwidth for the choices that really matter. One more thing about decision-making that nobody talks about. The best decision-makers I know have a bias toward action. They understand that making a decision and learning from the results is usually better than endless analysis and delayed action. Perfection paralysis keeps more people stuck than bad decisions ever will. Make the call. Learn from what happens. Adjust. Keep moving. Transitioning to next section, everything we've covered so far, the Victory Operating System, belief reprogramming, strategic decision-making, these are the foundations. But here's where it gets even more interesting, because knowing this stuff intellectually is completely different from being able to apply it when everything is falling apart, when the pressure is on, when your emotions are intense, when the stakes are high. That's what we're diving into next. How to build the kind of mental toughness that doesn't just bounce back from challenges, but actually gets stronger from them. How to turn obstacles into advantages. How to perform at your best when it matters most. This is the difference between people who have potential and people who actually fulfill it. Chapter 4. Building Mental Toughness That Actually Lasts Okay. Let's talk about resilience, but not the kind everyone talks about, because honestly, traditional resilience isn't enough anymore. Resilience is just the ability to bounce back to where you were before something bad happened. That's fine, but it's not what separates people who keep leveling up from people who just survive. What you actually need is something called anti-fragility. It's the ability to get stronger from challenges, obstacles, and even failures. Not just recover from them. Actually use them as fuel to become better than you were before. Here's what most people get wrong. They think the path to success should be smooth. They want comfort. They want ease. They try to eliminate all stress and difficulty from their lives. But here's what the science shows. Living systems that are protected from all stress become weak and fragile. Think about it. Your muscles only grow when you tear them down with resistance. Training. Your immune system only gets robust when it fights off actual threats. Your mind works exactly the same way. Mental strength comes from repeatedly facing challenges that are just beyond your current capacity and successfully navigating them, not avoiding them, not waiting until you feel ready, actually doing the hard thing and figuring it out. The people who consistently win, they deliberately seek out challenges that will build their anti-fragility. They volunteer for difficult projects. They put themselves in situations where they'll be slightly out of their depth. They embrace opportunities that require growth instead of opportunities that let them coast on what they already know how to do. And no, this isn't about being reckless or taking stupid risks. It's about understanding that your capacity only grows when you consistently operate at the edge of your current abilities. Stay in your comfort zone, and you'll stay exactly where you are. Push just beyond it regularly, and you'll expand what's possible for you. The key to building anti-fragility is learning to reframe challenges as strength training for your mind. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" start asking, "What is this building in me?" Instead of trying to eliminate all stress from your life, try to optimize the type and amount of stress to maximize growth. You need to distinguish between productive stress and destructive stress. Productive stress includes taking on stretch goals that force you to develop new skills, engaging in difficult conversations that improve your relationships, or putting yourself in situations where you might fail, but would learn valuable lessons from trying. That kind of stress builds capacity. Destructive stress includes chronic worry about things you can't control, perfectionism that prevents you from taking action, or overcommitting to low-value activities that just make you busy without producing real progress. That kind of stress just drains your energy without any benefit. Anti-fragile thinking also requires what psychologists call explanatory optimism. It's the way you explain setbacks to yourself. When things go wrong, people typically explain the situation using 3 dimensions: personal versus impersonal, permanent versus temporary, and pervasive versus specific. People with low resilience make negative events personal. It's my fault. Permanent. This always happens to me. And pervasive. Everything in my life is going wrong. This explanatory style creates learned helplessness. It reduces your willingness to try again, because what's the point if you're just going to fail anyway? Anti-fragile thinkers interpret setbacks differently. They see them as impersonal. Multiple factors contributed to this outcome, not just me. Temporary. This is a setback, not a life sentence. And specific. This particular approach didn't work in this specific situation, but that doesn't mean everything is broken. But here's where anti-fragile thinking goes. Beyond just avoiding negative explanations, it actively looks for the advantages that challenges create. Every obstacle builds your problem-solving skills. Every failure gives you data about what doesn't work. Every criticism offers information for improvement. Every setback forces you to develop new capabilities or find better approaches. I'm not saying you should pretend negative events are actually positive. That's toxic positivity, and it doesn't work. What I'm saying is train your mind to automatically look for and extract value from every experience, especially the difficult ones. Whenever something goes wrong, ask yourself these questions. What can I learn from this? How can this make me stronger? What opportunity does this create? What would I need to believe about this situation to feel energized instead of defeated? These questions redirect your mind toward growth instead of getting stuck in victimhood. Building anti-fragility also requires developing emotional regulations, skills that let you think clearly under pressure. Most people's decision-making falls apart when they're stressed, angry, or scared. Their emotions hijack their rational thinking, and they make reactive decisions that make everything worse. Anti-fragile individuals develop the ability to notice emotional intensity without being controlled by it. This involves something called cognitive reappraisal. Basically, changing how you think about a situation to change how you feel about it. Instead of trying to suppress negative emotions, which usually makes them stronger, you learn to reinterpret triggering situations in ways that naturally reduce emotional intensity and increase your sense of control. For example, instead of seeing a high-pressure presentation as a threat where you might embarrass yourself, you can reinterpret it as an opportunity to demonstrate your expertise and build your reputation. Same situation, completely different emotional response based on how you frame it. Chapter 5. Performing at your peak consistently. Let me ask you something. How often do you actually perform at your best? Not occasionally when everything aligns perfectly, but consistently, day after day, regardless of how you feel or what's happening around you. For most people, the answer is almost never. Their performance fluctuates wildly based on factors they can't control. They perform well when they feel motivated, when conditions are favorable, when they're in a good mood. But they struggle when motivation fades, when challenges arise, when they just don't feel like doing the work. Here's what separates amateurs from professionals. Amateurs wait for motivation. Professionals generate consistent output regardless of their emotional state. Elite athletes don't wait until they feel like training. Successful entrepreneurs don't wait until they feel motivated to work on their business. High performers in every field have learned to produce results even when they don't feel like it. This requires building what psychologists call self-regulation, the ability to control your behavior, emotions, and attention in service of your long-term goals. Self-regulation is like a muscle. It gets stronger with practice, but it also gets depleted through use. This is why high performers focus on building systems and habits that minimize the amount of willpower required for peak performance. They understand that relying on motivation or discipline alone is a losing strategy because both are unreliable over time. The foundation of consistent performance is creating environmental and structural supports that make success easier and failure harder. This means designing your physical environment to eliminate distractions and provide cues for productive behavior. It means structuring your schedule to allocate your highest energy periods to your most important work. It means building accountability systems that make it painful to underperform and rewarding to follow through. Let me give you a practical example. If you want to work out consistently, don't rely on motivation to get you to the gym. Instead, prepare your workout clothes the night before. Schedule your workouts at the same time every day. Find a workout partner who will call you out if you skip. Remove barriers that make exercise inconvenient. That's environmental design, and it's way more effective than willpower. High performers also understand the principle of energy management over time management. You can't actually manage time. It passes at the same rate for everyone, but you can manage your energy and attention. They identify their natural energy rhythms and schedule their most demanding work during peak energy periods. They protect their mental energy by eliminating unnecessary decisions, reducing context switching, and batching similar activities together. Mental energy gets consumed by decisions, conflicts, and cognitive load. Every choice you make, every temptation you resist, every task that requires intense focus depletes your mental energy reserves. This is why successful people often have very structured routines that eliminate trivial decisions. Think about it. Why do you think some ultra-successful people wear the same outfit every day? It's not because they lack fashion sense. It's because they're preserving mental energy for decisions that actually matter. They're not wasting willpower on what to wear when they could be using that energy to solve important problems. Consistent peak performance also requires understanding and managing your attention as your most valuable resource. In an era of constant distractions, the ability to focus deeply on important work has become rare and incredibly valuable. Most people's attention has been hijacked by social media, notifications, and the constant stimulation of modern life. Their minds have become addicted to novelty and variety. Sustained focus feels uncomfortable and difficult because they've trained themselves to need constant stimulation. High performers treat attention like a finite resource that must be protected and strategically deployed. They create distraction-free environments during focused work periods. They use techniques like time blocking to batch similar activities and minimize context switching. They practice meditation or other attention training exercises to strengthen their ability to sustain focus over longer periods. They also understand the difference between focus and flow states. Focus requires effort and self-regulation to maintain attention on a specific task. Flow states occur when you're fully immersed in an activity that perfectly matches your skill level to the challenge level. In flow, performance feels effortless and time seems to disappear. High performers learn to structure their work to create more opportunities for flow states while building the focus capacity to push through less engaging but necessary tasks. They know what conditions trigger flow for them, and they deliberately create those conditions. Peak performance psychology also involves managing the internal dialogue that runs through your mind during challenging moments. Most people have an inner critic that becomes loudest exactly when they need confidence most. This voice points out everything that could go wrong, reminds them of past failures, and creates doubt about their ability to succeed. High performers learn to notice this internal dialogue without being controlled by it. Instead of trying to eliminate negative self-talk, which usually makes it stronger, they learn to change their relationship with it. They develop metacognitive awareness, thinking about thinking. They notice when their minds are generating unhelpful thoughts and choose not to engage with those thoughts emotionally. Here's a powerful reframe that changed my relationship with self-doubt. You don't have to believe every thought you think, and you don't have to act on every emotion you feel. Thoughts and emotions are just mental events. They come and go. You can observe them without letting them control your behavior. This requires developing a different identity around performance. Most people see performance as something that happens to them based on external circumstances. High performers see performance as something they create through their choices, preparation, and mental management. They take responsibility for their mental state and develop the skills to perform at their best regardless of conditions. Chapter 6. Advanced Mental Models for Complex Thinking. Okay, let's level up your thinking. Most people navigate complex situations using intuition, emotion, or simple cause and effect thinking. They see the world in black and white. They look for single causes and simple solutions to complicated problems. This approach works fine for straightforward situations, but it completely breaks down when dealing with the complex, interconnected challenges that actually determine success. High performers understand that complex situations require sophisticated mental models. These are frameworks for understanding how different variables interact, how systems behave over time, and how to make decisions when there are multiple stakeholders with competing interests. Think of mental models as thinking tools that help you understand how the world works and predict the consequences of different actions. They're like maps for navigating unfamiliar territory. Just as physical maps show you terrain, roads, and obstacles in a geographic area, mental models show you patterns, relationships, and dynamics in whatever situation you're trying to understand. The quality of your mental models determines the quality of your decisions, and the quality of your decisions determines the quality of your outcomes. It's that simple and that important. Average people operate with a limited set of mental models they picked up unconsciously through experience. They think in linear cause and effect. If I do this, then that will happen. They assume correlation means causation. They believe good intentions lead to good results. They expect that working harder always produces better outcomes. These simple models work in simple situations, but they lead to costly mistakes when applied to complex systems. High performers deliberately study and collect sophisticated mental models from multiple disciplines: psychology, economics, biology, physics, game theory, systems thinking. They understand that the same underlying patterns appear across different domains. So, a model from biology might help you understand business dynamics. A concept from physics might illuminate relationship patterns. This cross-pollination of ideas gives them insights that people who think within single disciplines miss completely. Let me walk you through some of the most powerful mental models for complex situations. Systems thinking. This is understanding how different components of a system interact with each other over time. Most people focus on events and try to find single causes for outcomes they don't like. Systems thinkers focus on patterns and structures that create those events. They ask not just what happened, but what patterns led to this outcome and what structural changes would prevent this problem from recurring. Systems thinking reveals that most problems are symptoms of deeper structural issues. If your business is losing customers, the surface problem might be poor customer service. But the systems problem might be that your compensation structure rewards employees for closing sales instead of creating customer satisfaction, or that your training program doesn't teach people how to handle complaints effectively. Fixing the surface problem with better customer service training might provide temporary improvement, but the underlying system will continue creating the same problems until you fix the structure. Second order thinking. This means considering not just the immediate consequences of your actions, but the consequences of those consequences. Most people stop their analysis at first-order effects. If I lower my prices, I'll sell more products. Done. Decision made. Second-order thinking asks, okay, what happens after I sell more products? Will lower prices reduce my profit margins to unsustainable levels? Will customers start perceiving lower prices as indicating lower quality? Will competitors respond by lowering their prices too? What happens if a price war starts? Could I actually end up worse off than before? This type of thinking prevents unintended consequences that often make situations worse despite good intentions. There's a famous example called the Cobra effect. During colonial rule in India, the government was concerned about venomous cobras in Delhi, so they offered a bounty for every dead cobra. Sounds like a good solution, right? The first order effect was exactly what they wanted. People started killing cobras and bringing them in for payment. But here's the second order effect they didn't anticipate. Enterprising people started breeding cobras specifically to kill them for the bounty. When the government realized this and canceled the program, the cobra breeders released all their now worthless snakes into the wild. The cobra population actually increased because of the policy designed to reduce it. That's what happens when you don't think second order. Probabilistic thinking, average people think in terms of certainty. This will definitely happen. That definitely won't work. Probabilistic thinking recognizes that most outcomes involve uncertainty and focuses on estimating the likelihood of different scenarios. Instead of asking, will this work? High performers ask, what's the probability this will work? And how does that compare to other options? This shift in thinking leads to better decision-making under uncertainty. Instead of avoiding situations where you can't predict the outcome with certainty, you learn to make decisions based on expected value. That's the probability of different outcomes multiplied by the consequences of each outcome. A decision with a 30% chance of extraordinary success and a 70% chance of manageable failure might be better than a decision with a 90% chance of modest success and a 10% chance of modest failure. It depends on the magnitude of the outcomes, not just the probabilities. Inversion. This is approaching problems backwards. Instead of asking, how can I succeed, you ask, how could I fail, and how can I avoid those failure modes? Instead of asking, what should I do, you ask, what should I definitely not do? Inversion helps you identify hidden risks and constraints that forward thinking might miss. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's business partner, attributes much of his success to inversion thinking. He's famous for saying, all I want to know is where I'm going to die, so I never go there. Applied to your life, inversion means identifying the behaviors and decisions that would definitely lead to failure, then making sure you never do those things. It's often easier to avoid stupidity than to seek brilliance. Optionality. This means structuring situations to benefit from positive, unexpected events, while limiting exposure to negative, unexpected events. It involves making decisions that give you multiple paths forward instead of committing to single courses of action. Instead of betting everything on one opportunity, you create a portfolio of opportunities where each has limited downside but significant upside potential. This is how venture capitalists think. They know most of their investments will fail. But the few that succeed will more than make up for all the failures. You can apply this same thinking to your career, your projects, your relationships. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Create options. Keep doors open. Position yourself to benefit from luck while protecting yourself from catastrophic loss. Competitive dynamics. Most people make decisions in isolation as if they're the only person making strategic choices. But in competitive environments, your success depends not just on what you do, but on what others do in response to what you do. Game theory provides frameworks for thinking about these multiplayer situations where everyone's decisions affect everyone else's outcomes. Understanding competitive dynamics prevents the mistake of optimizing for current conditions without considering how those conditions might change in response to your actions. If you discover a profitable market opportunity, you need to consider how quickly competitors will notice and respond. If you develop a competitive advantage, you need to think about how sustainable that advantage will be as others try to copy or neutralize it. The key is thinking multiple moves ahead like a chess player. Don't just make the best move for right now. Make the move that sets you up for the best position 3, 4, 5 moves from now. Applying mental models. Here's the thing about mental models. Knowing them intellectually is completely different from actually using them to make better decisions. You need to practice applying them to real situations until they become automatic. Start by choosing 1 or 2 models that resonate with you and deliberately using them this week. When You face a decision. Pause and ask yourself, what would systems thinking reveal about this situation? What are the second-order effects I'm not considering? What's the probability of different outcomes? Over time, these questions become habitual. You start seeing the world through these lenses automatically, and that's when your decision-making quality goes through the roof. The people who consistently make better decisions than everyone else, they're not smarter. They're not luckier. They just have better mental models for understanding complexity. And now you do too. Chapter 7. Mastering Your Emotions. When it matters most. Let's talk about something most people avoid. Emotions under pressure. Because here's the reality. Pressure doesn't build character. It reveals it. When the stakes are high, when deadlines are crushing you, when everything feels uncertain, that's when you find out who you really are. Most people's performance completely falls apart under pressure. Why? Because their emotions hijack their decision-making. Fear makes them freeze or play it too safe. Anger makes them reactive and reckless. Anxiety makes them overthink and second-guess every move. Excitement makes them impulsive and careless. High performers understand that emotional mastery isn't about eliminating emotions. That's impossible, and honestly, it would be a terrible idea, even if you could do it. Emotions provide valuable information. The goal is maintaining access to your best thinking, even when emotions are running hot. Let me break down how emotions actually affect your brain, because once you understand the mechanics, you can work with them instead of being controlled by them. When you're in an intense emotional state, your brain prioritizes speed over accuracy. There's a part of your brain called the amygdala that processes emotional threats. When it detects danger, real or perceived, it can literally hijack your prefrontal cortex. That's the part that handles complex reasoning, planning, and rational decision-making. This emotional hijacking made perfect sense from an evolutionary perspective. When a predator was chasing you, quick reactions meant the difference between life and death. Stopping to rationally analyze your options would get you killed. But in modern life, emotional reactions usually make problems worse, not better. And here's what most people don't realize. Emotional hijacking doesn't just affect your thinking, it affects what information you even notice and remember. When you're anxious, you become hypervigilant for threats and completely miss opportunities. When you're angry, you focus on what's wrong and ignore what's working. When you're overly excited, you see potential rewards but miss obvious risks. Each emotional state acts like a filter that determines what data reaches your conscious awareness. You're literally seeing a different reality based on your emotional state. High performers develop emotional awareness. That's the ability to recognize emotional intensity as it's building, not after it's already taken control. Most people only notice their emotions after they're fully activated and affecting their behavior. By then, it's much harder to regain control. Emotional awareness involves paying attention to early warning signs, changes in your breathing, muscle tension, shifts in your thought patterns, where your attention is focusing. These are signals that emotional intensity is increasing. Here's the key insight. There's always a gap between the trigger that starts an emotional response and the point where that emotion controls your behavior. Most people experience this gap as instantaneous. But with practice, you can learn to recognize and extend this gap. In that extended gap, you have the opportunity to choose how to respond instead of just reacting automatically. This is where real emotional mastery lives. Let me explain the physiology so you understand what's happening. When you encounter a trigger, your sympathetic nervous system activates. It releases stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline. These hormones prepare your body for fight or flight by increasing heart rate, blood pressure, and muscle tension while decreasing complex thinking. The entire response happens within milliseconds. But here's the thing. It takes several minutes for those hormones to clear your system even after the trigger is gone. This is why people say things in anger that they regret later, or make fear-based decisions that seem obviously wrong in retrospect. The emotional chemistry in their brains was still affecting their judgment even though the immediate trigger had passed. Understanding this process helps you recognize that intense emotions are temporary chemical states, not accurate reflections of reality. You can literally tell yourself, this is just chemistry. It will pass. And that simple reframe can prevent emotional reactions you'd regret. Techniques for maintaining control. Let me give you some practical techniques for keeping your head when everyone else is losing theirs. Technique 1. Physiological regulation. Use your body to influence your emotional state. Deep, slow breathing activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which counteracts the stress response. When you feel emotional intensity building, take 6 deep breaths. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Exhale for 6 counts. This isn't woo-woo stuff. It's basic physiology. Your posture also affects your emotional state. Changing from a collapsed, defensive posture to an upright, open posture sends signals to your brain that you're in control rather than threatened. Stand up straight. Pull your shoulders back. Literally embody confidence, and your brain will follow. Technique 2. Cognitive reframing. Change how you interpret triggering situations to reduce emotional intensity. This works because emotions are largely determined by the meaning you assign to events, not the events themselves. The same situation can trigger completely different emotional responses depending on how you interpret what's happening. Instead of seeing a high-pressure situation as a threat where you might fail and look bad, reframe it as an opportunity to prove what you're capable of and build your reputation. Instead of seeing criticism as a personal attack, reframe it as information for improvement. Instead of seeing a setback as evidence that you're failing, reframe it as temporary feedback that's showing you what to adjust. The interpretation you choose determines the emotion you feel. Choose interpretations that preserve your sense of agency and possibility. Technique 3. Attention control. Direct your focus toward elements of the situation that support clear thinking and effective action. In any complex situation, there are multiple things you could focus on. You could focus on what's going wrong or what's going right. Factors you can control or factors you can't control. Worst-case scenarios or best-case scenarios. High performers don't ignore negative information or pretend problems don't exist, but they strategically direct their attention toward actionable information while limiting exposure to information that triggers unproductive emotions without providing useful insights. Ask yourself, what do I need to focus on right now to move this situation forward? What's the most useful way to think about this challenge? Then direct your attention there and keep redirecting it when your mind wanders to unhelpful places. Developing distress tolerance. Emotional mastery also involves what psychologists call distress tolerance, the ability to function effectively even when experiencing uncomfortable emotions. Most people try to avoid or immediately escape uncomfortable emotional states. They distract themselves. They numb themselves with substances or activities. They make impulsive decisions just to relieve the discomfort quickly. This approach prevents them from handling situations that require persisting through temporary discomfort. Having difficult conversations feels uncomfortable, but strengthens relationships. Taking calculated risks feels scary, but creates breakthrough opportunities. Maintaining discipline when motivation is low feels unpleasant, but builds the consistency that leads to success. Distress tolerance involves accepting that discomfort is temporary and doesn't require immediate action to relieve it. You can feel anxious without avoiding challenging situations. You can feel angry without saying things you'll regret. You can feel disappointed without giving up on important goals. Emotions provide information about your current state, but they don't have to control your choices. This is the ultimate form of emotional freedom. Chapter 8. Building systems that compound into dominance. Here's something most people get completely wrong about success. They think it's created by occasional bursts of intense effort or moments of brilliant insight. But that's not how it actually works. Success is created by small, consistent actions that compound over time into extraordinary results. Most people focus on goals and outcomes while neglecting the daily systems that actually create those outcomes. They set ambitious targets, but don't build the daily practices that would make achieving those targets inevitable. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. Let me say that again because it's critical. You don't rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. A system is a collection of processes, habits, and structures that work together to produce consistent results. Goals are about the results you want to achieve. Systems are about the processes that lead to those results. Goals provide direction. Systems provide progress. The problem with focusing primarily on goals is that goals are achieved through sporadic effort, while systems create continuous improvement. When you focus on systems instead of just goals, you create exponential growth rather than linear growth. Linear growth means making the same amount of progress each day. If you improve 1% daily through linear growth, you improve 365% in a year. That's decent. But exponential growth means your progress compounds. If you improve 1% daily through exponential growth, you improve 3,778% in a year. The difference between linear and exponential growth is the difference between incremental improvement and complete transformation. The key to exponential growth is understanding compound effects. Small improvements in multiple areas don't just add together, they multiply each other. If you improve your decision-making by 10%, your focus by 10%, and your energy management by 10%, your overall performance doesn't improve by 30%. It improves by 33.1% because you're multiplying the improvements. This might seem like a small difference, but it compounds dramatically over time. After a year of compounding 10% improvements across 3 areas, you're not 30% better. You're hundreds of percent better. Building sustainable systems, high performers. Build systems around activities that have the highest compound potential. Activities that don't just produce immediate results, but also increase your capacity to produce better results in the future. Reading builds knowledge that improves all future decisions. Exercise builds energy and mental clarity that enhance all other activities. Building relationships creates opportunities and support systems that accelerate all other goals. Learning new skills increases your ability to create value and solve problems. The foundation of any effective system is establishing non-negotiable daily practices that advance your most important objectives regardless of circumstances, mood, or competing demands. These practices become automatic through repetition, requiring minimal willpower to maintain. The key is starting with practices that are small enough to be sustainable, but significant enough to create meaningful progress over time. Most people fail to build sustainable systems because they try to change too much too quickly. They create elaborate morning routines. They commit to working out for 2 hours daily. They pledge to read for 3 hours every night. These ambitious plans feel inspiring initially, but they require more willpower than most people can sustain consistently. When willpower fails, the entire system collapses. High performers use the principle of minimum viable habits. Identify the smallest version of a practice that still moves you forward, then build consistency around that minimal version before expanding. Instead of committing to exercise for an hour daily, start with 5 minutes daily. Instead of reading for an hour, start with 1 page. Instead of meditating for 30 minutes, start with 2 minutes. The goal is establishing the neural pathways and identity associated with the practice, not achieving significant results immediately. Once the minimal version becomes automatic, you can gradually expand without requiring additional willpower. The person who consistently exercises for 5 minutes daily can easily expand to 10 minutes because they've already established the habit. The person who reads 1 page daily has already overcome the resistance to reading and can gradually increase. Tracking and feedback effective systems also include tracking mechanisms that provide clear feedback about progress and consistency. What gets measured gets managed. Measurement creates accountability even when external accountability isn't available. High performers track both leading indicators and lagging indicators. Leading indicators are activities that predict future results. How many meaningful conversations you had. How many hours you spent learning. How consistently you followed your routines. Lagging indicators are the results those activities produce. Revenue generated, skills acquired, energy levels improved. Tracking leading indicators is more important than tracking lagging indicators because leading indicators are directly under your control, while lagging indicators are influenced by many factors beyond your actions. You can control how consistently you exercise. You can't directly control how quickly you build muscle or lose weight. You can control how many valuable connections you make. You can't directly control which opportunities those connections create. The most sophisticated systems include feedback loops that allow continuous optimization based on results. Instead of rigidly following the same routine regardless of outcomes, high performers regularly assess what's working, what's not working, and what could be improved. This requires building regular review periods into your system, weekly assessments of what progress was made and what obstacles were encountered, monthly evaluations of whether current practices are producing desired outcomes, quarterly deeper analyses of whether the overall system needs structural changes. These reviews prevent the mistake of persistently following ineffective practices just because they've become habitual. Environmental design. High performers also understand the importance of designing their environment to support their systems rather than working against them. Your physical and social environment has enormous influence over your behavior, often more influence than your conscious willpower. If you want to eat healthier, fill your kitchen with healthy options and remove unhealthy ones. If you want to read more, place books in visible locations and remove distracting alternatives. If you want to exercise consistently, prepare your workout clothes the night before and remove barriers that make exercise inconvenient. Environmental design extends beyond physical spaces to include social environments. The people you spend time with significantly influence your standards, beliefs, and behaviors through social proof and peer pressure. High performers deliberately cultivate relationships with people who model the behaviors and mindsets they want to develop while limiting exposure to people who reinforce patterns they want to change. Your circle determines your ceiling. Choose it wisely. The ultimate goal of building systems is creating automaticity, performing important behaviors without requiring conscious decision-making or willpower. When beneficial behaviors become automatic, they happen regardless of motivation, circumstances, or competing demands. This frees up your mental energy for higher-level strategic thinking and creative problem-solving rather than constantly battling yourself to do things you know are important. Chapter 9. Social Intelligence and Influence. Let's get real about something. Success in any field ultimately depends on your ability to work effectively with other people. No meaningful achievement happens in isolation. Whether you're building a business, advancing in your career, or creating something significant, you need other people's cooperation, support, and resources. Yet most people approach social interactions reactively. They hope others will like them and help them without understanding the psychological principles that actually drive human behavior. High performers study social dynamics systematically and develop sophisticated skills for understanding, connecting with, and influencing others. And no, this isn't manipulation. It's understanding how people work and using that knowledge to create genuine value and mutual benefit. Understanding human nature. Social intelligence starts with understanding that every person you interact with is primarily concerned with their own interests, challenges, and objectives. This isn't selfishness. It's human nature. People don't wake up thinking about how to help you achieve your goals. They wake up thinking about their own problems, opportunities, and priorities. The fastest way to build rapport and influence is to understand their world from their perspective and find ways to align your interests with theirs. This requires developing theory of mind, the ability to understand that other people have thoughts, feelings, beliefs, and motivations that are different from your own. Most people assume others think the same way they do, value the same things, and are motivated by the same factors. This assumption leads to communication failures and influence attempts that backfire because they're based on what would convince you rather than what would convince the other person. High performers become students of individual psychology. They pay attention to what each person talks about, what they avoid talking about, what energizes them, what frustrates them, what they value, and what they fear. They notice whether someone is motivated more by gaining rewards or avoiding risks, whether they prefer detailed analysis or big-picture thinking, whether they make decisions quickly or need time to process, whether they're influenced more by logic or emotions. Understanding individual differences allows you to adapt your communication style to match each person's preferences and decision-making processes. When talking to analytical people, lead with data, logic, and systematic reasoning. When talking to emotional people, focus on feelings, relationships, and personal impact. Social proof and reciprocity. Beyond individual psychology, high performers understand group dynamics and social proof. People's behavior changes dramatically when they're in groups compared to when they're alone. In groups, people often defer to perceived authorities, follow what seems to be the group consensus, and suppress their individual preferences to maintain social acceptance. Understanding these dynamics allows you to structure social situations to encourage the behaviors you want. Social proof is one of the most powerful influence principles. People look to the behavior of others to determine what's appropriate in uncertain situations. If you want someone to adopt a new behavior, showing them that similar people are already doing it is more persuasive than logical arguments about why they should change. Reciprocity is equally powerful. People feel obligated to return favors and gestures of goodwill. But reciprocity works most effectively when it's genuine rather than transactional. Instead of doing favors to create obligations, focus on genuinely helping people achieve their objectives. When you consistently add value to others' lives without immediate expectation of return, you build relationship capital that creates long-term influence and support. The key is understanding that different people value different types of assistance. Some people most appreciate help with practical problems. Others value introductions to useful contacts. Some want recognition and public acknowledgement. Others prefer private support and encouragement. High performers identify what each person would find most valuable and find ways to provide that specific type of value. Building credibility. Authority and credibility are essential foundations for influence. People are more likely to be persuaded by individuals they perceive as competent, trustworthy, and knowledgeable. But authority isn't just about credentials or formal positions. It's about demonstrating expertise through your knowledge, insights, and track record of results. High performers build credibility through small, consistent actions over time rather than grand gestures. Being punctual builds credibility. Following through on commitments builds credibility. Providing accurate information builds credibility. Acknowledging mistakes and limitations builds credibility. Taking responsibility for outcomes builds credibility. These behaviors signal that you can be trusted with bigger responsibilities and more important decisions. The psychology of commitment. High performers also understand the psychology of commitment and consistency. People have a strong need to appear consistent with their previous statements, decisions, and public commitments. Once someone commits to a position publicly, they become psychologically invested in defending that position even when presented with contradictory evidence. This means getting someone to make small commitments that align with your objectives creates momentum toward larger commitments. The most effective commitments are voluntary rather than forced. Instead of telling people what they should do, skilled influencers ask questions that lead people to conclude for themselves that certain actions make sense. Instead of presenting fully formed solutions, they involve others in developing solutions so those people feel ownership of the ideas. People support what they help create much more enthusiastically than what's imposed on them. Creating win-win scenarios. The highest level of social intelligence is creating scenarios where helping others achieve their objectives simultaneously advances your own objectives. This requires creativity and systems thinking to identify opportunities where collaboration creates more value for everyone than individual effort would. When you become known as someone who creates mutual benefit rather than pursuing zero-sum competitions, people actively seek opportunities to work with you. That's when influence becomes effortless, because you're not pushing, you're attracting. Chapter 10. The Compound Effect of Mental Superiority. Okay, here's where everything we've talked about starts coming together, because here's what most people don't realize. Each mental upgrade you make doesn't just improve that one area, it amplifies every other area of your life. Think about it like this. Improving your decision-making framework makes your emotional mastery more effective because you're making better choices about how to respond to emotional triggers. Developing better mental models helps you build more effective systems because you understand how different variables interact over time. Building anti-fragility increases your social intelligence because you're more willing to engage in challenging conversations that build stronger relationships. This is the compound effect in action, and it explains why some people seem to improve exponentially, while others stay stuck at basically the same level, despite working hard. Small mental advantages compound into enormous practical advantages over time. Someone who makes slightly better decisions consistently will end up in completely different circumstances than someone who makes slightly worse decisions consistently, even if they start from the exact same place and work equally hard. Let me show you the math, because once you see this, you can't unsee it. The mathematics of compounding are counterintuitive. The effects start small and accelerate over time. If two people start with equal abilities, but one improves 1% daily, while the other improves 0.5% daily, the difference seems negligible at first. After 1 year, the person improving 1% daily is about 38 times better than they started. The person improving 0.5% daily is only 6 times better. That's already a significant gap. But watch what happens over 5 years. The 1% person is over 1,400 times better. The 0.5% person is only about 180 times better. The high gap becomes astronomical, and this compounding effect applies to every aspect of mental performance. Small improvements in focus compound into massive advantages in productivity. Small improvements in emotional regulation compound into dramatically better relationships and leadership capabilities. Small improvements in strategic thinking compound into vastly superior life outcomes. The key is understanding that every mental upgrade is an investment that pays dividends across every other area of your performance. High performers understand that developing mental superiority is like building a high-performance engine that makes everything else in your life more effective. Once you have the mental frameworks, emotional skills, and systematic approaches we've covered, every goal becomes easier to achieve. Every challenge becomes easier to navigate. Every opportunity becomes easier to capitalize on. You're not just improving specific skills. You're upgrading the operating system that runs everything else. The dark side of compounding. But here's what you need to know. Compounding works in both directions. Just as positive mental habits compound into extraordinary results, negative mental habits compound into increasingly limiting outcomes. Mental patterns that seem harmless in the short term create devastating long-term consequences through compound effects. Procrastination that costs you 1 hour today compounds into missed opportunities, reduced capabilities, and weakened credibility over time. Poor decision-making that creates small problems today compounds into increasingly complex challenges that become harder to resolve. This is why mental superiority isn't just an advantage. It's a necessity for anyone who wants significant success. In competitive environments, falling behind mentally means falling behind exponentially. People with superior mental frameworks don't just perform slightly better. They operate in entirely different categories of effectiveness. They see opportunities others miss. They solve problems others can't handle. They create value others can't imagine. Social compounding. The compound effect of mental superiority also extends beyond individual performance to impact everyone around you. When you develop superior mental capabilities, you become more valuable to everyone you interact with. You provide better advice. You make better decisions for teams and organizations. You create more opportunities for others. This creates positive feedback loops where others want to work with you, support your initiatives, and provide you with resources and opportunities. People with mental superiority attract other high performers because they can contribute meaningfully to challenging projects and complex problems. They gain access to exclusive opportunities that are only offered to people who've demonstrated exceptional capabilities. They build networks with other individuals who operate at high levels, creating compound effects through association and collaboration. Leverage points. Understanding the compound effect changes how you think about effort and improvement. Instead of looking for quick fixes or dramatic breakthroughs, you focus on consistent small improvements that accumulate over time. Instead of trying to change everything at once, you identify the highest leverage mental upgrades that will amplify everything else you do. The highest leverage improvements are usually in areas where you're currently weakest rather than areas where you're already strong. If you're great at strategic thinking but terrible at emotional regulation, improving emotional regulation will have more compound impact than becoming even better at strategy. If you're excellent at individual performance but weak at social influence, developing social intelligence will unlock opportunities that pure individual capability can't access. Accelerating returns, mental superiority also creates what economists call increasing returns. The more you develop these capabilities, the easier it becomes to develop them further. Learning accelerates learning because better mental models help you understand new information faster. Emotional mastery makes it easier to handle the discomfort of pushing beyond your current capabilities. Social intelligence provides access to mentors, resources, and opportunities that accelerate further development. This means developing mental superiority is like climbing a mountain where each step up makes the next step easier rather than harder. The beginning requires the most effort because you're working against old patterns and building new capabilities from scratch. But once you reach critical mass, improvement becomes self-sustaining because you have the mental tools to continue learning, growing, and optimizing systematically. Identity level change. The ultimate compound effect of mental superiority is that it becomes part of your identity rather than something you have to consciously maintain. When these mental frameworks become automatic, you don't have to remember to think strategically, regulate your emotions, or influence others effectively. These capabilities become integrated into who you are and how you naturally operate. At this level, mental superiority creates effortless excellence where your default behaviors produce extraordinary results. This transformation doesn't happen overnight, but it's inevitable if you consistently apply these principles and frameworks. Every decision to think more strategically, every moment you choose emotional regulation over emotional reaction, every time you apply systematic thinking to complex problems, you're reinforcing neural pathways that make mental superiority more natural and automatic. The question isn't whether these principles work. The science is proven. The frameworks exist. The only variable is your commitment to applying them consistently over time until they become automatic. Chapter 11. The Psychology of Mastery. Let me tell you something that might surprise you. Mastery isn't a destination you reach where everything becomes easy and you can finally relax. That's a complete misconception that keeps most people from ever achieving real mastery. True mastery is a mindset you embody. It's characterized not by the absence of challenge, but by the embrace of increasingly sophisticated challenges that continue pushing you beyond your current capabilities. Here's what actually happens when you become competent at something. You don't eliminate problems. You gain access to more advanced problems that were previously invisible or impossible for you to even attempt. Think about it. A beginning chess player struggles with basic piece movements and simple tactics. An intermediate player faces complex strategic decisions and positional understanding. A master deals with psychological warfare, deep preparation, and theoretical innovations that beginners can't even comprehend. This pattern appears across every domain of achievement. Beginning entrepreneurs struggle with basic operations like making sales and managing cash flow. Successful entrepreneurs face challenges like scaling culture, managing partnerships, and navigating regulations. Elite entrepreneurs deal with global market dynamics, technological disruption, and legacy issues that most people never encounter. Understanding this progression prevents the frustration that kills most improvement efforts. Many people become discouraged when advancing to higher levels creates new difficulties. They interpret increased challenge as evidence that they're not really improving or that they've chosen the wrong path. Masters understand that increased challenge is evidence of progress, not lack of progress. More sophisticated problems indicate you've developed the capabilities necessary to engage with more sophisticated work. Growth orientation versus performance orientation. The master's mindset involves what psychologists call a growth orientation rather than a performance orientation. Performance-oriented individuals focus on demonstrating their current abilities and avoiding situations where they might fail or look incompetent. Growth-oriented individuals focus on expanding their abilities and actively seek situations where failure is possible, because that's where learning happens most rapidly. This orientation affects how you interpret setbacks, criticism, and competition. Performance-oriented people see failures as evidence of their limitations and criticism as attacks on their competence. Growth-oriented people see failures as information about what needs improvement and criticism as data for optimization. I'll be honest with you, I used to be extremely performance-oriented. I avoided anything where I might look bad. I only did things I was already good at. And you know what? I stayed stuck at the same level for years because I wasn't challenging myself. The shift to growth orientation changed everything. Now I actively seek out situations where I might fail because I know that's where the real growth happens. Deliberate practice masters also engage in what researchers call deliberate practice. That's focused, systematic practice that targets specific weaknesses and pushes beyond current comfort zones. Most people engage in naive practice. They repeat activities they're already comfortable with rather than working on skills that are currently difficult. Naive practice feels productive because you're busy and active, but it doesn't create significant improvement because it's not challenging your current limitations. Deliberate practice requires several components that most people avoid because they make practice uncomfortable. First, accurate self-assessment to identify precisely what skills need improvement. Most people prefer working on things they're already good at rather than confronting areas where they're weak. Second, designing practice sessions that specifically target those weaknesses even when it feels frustrating and progress seems slow. Third, immediate accurate feedback about performance. Most people practice in isolation where they don't receive honest assessment. They develop confidence in skills that aren't actually as strong as they believe. Masters actively seek feedback from credible sources who can identify flaws they can't see themselves. Fourth, sustained concentration over extended periods. The mental effort required to work consistently at the edge of your capabilities is exhausting. That's why most people avoid it. Comfort with uncertainty. The psychology of continuous improvement also involves understanding how expertise changes your relationship with uncertainty and complexity. Beginners prefer clear rules, step-by-step instructions, and predictable outcomes. They want to know exactly what to do in every situation and feel uncomfortable with ambiguous decisions. Masters become comfortable with uncertainty and develop the ability to make good decisions with incomplete information. This comfort with uncertainty allows masters to operate effectively in complex, rapidly changing environments where beginners would be paralyzed. Instead of waiting for perfect information or clear instructions, masters gather the best available information, make decisions based on their understanding of underlying principles, and adjust based on feedback from results. Metacognitive skills. Masters also develop metacognitive skills. Thinking about thinking, they become aware of their own mental processes and can consciously adjust their approach based on what the situation requires. They notice when they are falling into unproductive thought patterns and can redirect their mental energy toward more useful activities. They recognize when they're operating from habit rather than conscious choice and can deliberately engage different cognitive strategies. This metacognitive awareness extends to understanding their own learning processes. Masters know what conditions help them learn most effectively, what types of practice produce the fastest improvement, and what mental states optimize their performance. Pattern recognition. Through chunking, advanced mastery involves developing what experts call chunking, the ability to recognize complex patterns as single units rather than collections of individual components. Masters in any field quickly identify meaningful patterns that beginners miss entirely. Expert doctors recognize symptom patterns that indicate specific conditions. Elite athletes anticipate opponents' actions based on subtle cues that novices don't notice. Chunking dramatically increases processing speed and reduces cognitive load, allowing masters to handle much more complex situations than people analyzing everything at the component level. But chunking develops only through extensive exposure to patterns within specific domains. This is why expertise doesn't transfer easily between fields. The pattern recognition skills that make someone a master in one area don't automatically apply to different areas. Creative mastery. The highest levels of mastery involve creative contributions that advance entire fields rather than just achieving personal excellence within existing frameworks. Masters at this level don't just apply existing knowledge, they generate new knowledge, develop innovative approaches, and establish new standards that others follow. This requires combining deep expertise with creative thinking and the courage to challenge conventional wisdom. Creative mastery often involves what researchers call bisociation, combining ideas, techniques, or principles from different fields to create novel solutions. Masters develop broad knowledge across multiple domains specifically to create opportunities for this type of creative combination. They understand that breakthrough innovations usually occur at the intersection of different fields rather than from incremental improvements within single disciplines. Chapter 12. Breaking Through Plateaus. Let's talk about something every serious person encounters: plateaus. Those frustrating periods where improvement seems to stop despite continued effort. These plateaus feel discouraging and often lead people to conclude they've reached their natural limits, or that further improvement is impossible. But here's what you need to understand. Plateaus are actually predictable parts of the development process. Understanding why they occur allows you to break through them systematically, rather than being stopped by them. Mental plateaus occur for several reasons most people don't understand. First, your brain becomes efficient at current skills and stops creating new neural pathways. When you first learn something new, your brain creates multiple pathways as it figures out how to perform the skill. As you practice, your brain identifies the most efficient pathways and strengthens those while allowing unused pathways to weaken. This optimization makes current performance more automatic and less energy intensive. But it also makes further improvement more difficult because you're no longer forcing your brain to develop new capabilities. Second, continued improvement often requires qualitatively different approaches rather than just more of the same effort. The strategies that take you from beginner to intermediate are usually different from the strategies that take you from intermediate to advanced. Many people plateau because they keep using approaches that worked earlier but are no longer sufficient for the next level. Third, higher levels of performance often require developing completely new categories of skills rather than just improving existing skills. A salesperson might plateau because they've maximized their current persuasion techniques and now need to develop deeper psychological understanding. Diagnosing your plateau. Breaking through plateaus requires first recognizing you're in one. Many people don't notice plateaus because they mistake activity for progress. They're still busy, still working hard, still engaged, but they're not actually improving. The clearest sign of a plateau is that your performance has remained essentially unchanged for an extended period despite continued effort. Once you've identified a plateau, the next step is diagnosing what's causing it. This requires honest self-assessment and often external feedback from coaches, mentors, or peers who can identify limitations you can't see yourself. The most common causes are practicing the same skills repeatedly without increasing difficulty, avoiding areas where you're weak in favor of areas where you're strong, and using approaches that worked at earlier stages but aren't sophisticated enough for your current level. Strategies for breaking plateaus. The first strategy is deliberately increasing difficulty and complexity in your practice. If you've been practicing the same types of problems repeatedly, find harder problems that push beyond your current capabilities. If you've been working in familiar environments, seek out unfamiliar situations that require adapting your skills to new contexts. This often means temporarily accepting decreased performance as you work on more challenging material. Most people resist this because it feels like moving backward. But temporary performance decreases are often necessary for long-term improvement because they force your brain to develop new capabilities. The second strategy is identifying and specifically targeting your weakest skills rather than continuing to develop your strongest skills. This requires overcoming the natural tendency to work on things you enjoy and are good at. Most people's weakest skills are weak precisely because they avoid practicing them. Breaking this cycle requires systematic analysis of what capabilities your next level demands and honest assessment of which capabilities you currently lack. The third strategy involves seeking out different types of feedback and learning environments. If you've been learning primarily through individual practice, you might need feedback from coaches. If you've been learning primarily through instruction, you might need real-world application where you face unpredictable challenges. Different learning environments activate different aspects of your capabilities and reveal different types of limitations. Questioning, assumptions, advanced plateau breaking techniques involve questioning fundamental assumptions about how to approach your field. Sometimes plateaus occur because you've optimized within a particular framework, but the framework itself is limiting further progress. Breaking through requires stepping outside that framework and exploring completely different approaches. This might mean studying how experts in other fields approach similar challenges, learning from people who've achieved results through unconventional methods, or experimenting with techniques that seem contrary to conventional wisdom. Psychological barriers, plateaus, are also often caused by psychological factors rather than just skill limitations. Fear of failure can prevent you from attempting challenges that would drive improvement. Perfectionism can keep you practicing safe, familiar skills rather than risking mistakes on harder material. Identity attachments can make it difficult to adopt new approaches that contradict how you see yourself or how others see you. Breaking through psychological plateaus requires addressing these mental barriers directly. Sometimes the biggest barrier to improvement isn't skill-related. It's psychological resistance to becoming different than who you currently are. And that requires a whole different approach to breakthrough, transfer skills. The most sophisticated approach to plateau breaking involves developing transfer skills, the ability to apply insights developed in one area to completely different areas. Instead of just becoming better within specific domains, you learn to extract underlying principles that apply across multiple domains. This creates accelerated learning in new areas because you can leverage insights from previous development rather than starting from scratch. Transfer skills develop through deliberately looking for similarities between different domains, experimenting with applying techniques from familiar areas to unfamiliar areas, and developing abstract models that capture essential principles. Breaking through plateaus ultimately requires accepting that continued growth demands moving outside your comfort zone repeatedly. Plateaus are often signals that you've become too comfortable and need to embrace higher levels of challenge, uncertainty, and temporary incompetence. The willingness to repeatedly move from competence back into incompetence in service of continued growth is what separates people who keep improving throughout their lives from people who plateau and stagnate. And honestly, that willingness is what defines whether you'll achieve true mastery or just mediocrity, dressed up as competence. Chapter 13. Leading Through Mental Clarity. Let me tell you something about leadership that most people completely miss. Leadership isn't about authority, charisma, or having some fancy title. Real leadership is about mental clarity that enables you to see solutions when everyone else sees chaos, make decisions when everyone else is paralyzed, and maintain effectiveness when everyone else is overwhelmed. Everything we've discussed about developing mental superiority becomes exponentially more powerful when applied to leadership. Because your mental capabilities don't just improve your individual performance, they improve the performance of everyone you influence. The foundation of leadership through mental superiority is understanding that people follow clarity, not authority. In uncertain, complex, or high-pressure situations, people naturally gravitate toward whoever seems to understand what's happening and knows what to do. This gravitational pull toward clarity occurs regardless of formal titles, organizational hierarchies, or established power structures. The person who can make sense of confusion and provide direction becomes the de facto leader, whether or not they have official authority. Mental superiority creates this clarity through several mechanisms. Superior mental models allow you to see patterns and connections that others miss. When everyone else is overwhelmed by complexity, you can identify the key variables that actually matter. When others are paralyzed by uncertainty, you can make decisions based on probabilistic thinking and strategic frameworks. Emotional mastery allows you to maintain cognitive effectiveness when others are hijacked by stress, fear, or excitement. This creates a stark contrast in environments where most people's thinking deteriorates under pressure. Your ability to remain calm, think clearly, and make good decisions when stakes are high makes you invaluable. But here's the shift. Leadership through mental superiority requires understanding that your role changes from individual performer to capability multiplier. Instead of just using your mental advantages for personal achievement, you must learn to transfer those advantages to others. Most leaders focus on directing actions, assigning tasks, setting deadlines, monitoring compliance. Leaders with mental superiority focus on upgrading others' decision-making frameworks, mental models, and problem-solving capabilities. Instead of being the person who always has the answers, you become the person who helps others develop better questions and thinking processes. This approach scales better because you're multiplying capabilities rather than just directing activities. Chapter 14. Thinking about your thinking. The highest level of mental superiority involves developing metacognition. Thinking about thinking. While most people operate from their thoughts unconsciously, masters learn to observe their mental processes, evaluate their thinking quality, and deliberately choose cognitive strategies based on what different situations require. This meta-level awareness creates exponential improvements because you're not just thinking better. You're optimizing how you think about different types of problems. Metacognition begins with understanding that thinking isn't a single activity, but a collection of different cognitive processes that can be consciously selected and combined. Problem-solving uses different mental processes than creative ideation, which uses different processes than analytical evaluation, which uses different processes than strategic planning. Most people use the same thinking approach for every situation. Mental masters develop cognitive flexibility, the ability to recognize what type of thinking a situation requires and consciously engage the appropriate cognitive processes. When facing complex analytical problems, they engage systematic logical reasoning. When generating creative solutions, they allow associative, nonlinear thinking. When making decisions under time pressure, they rely on pattern recognition and intuition developed through experience. This cognitive flexibility requires building awareness of your default thinking patterns and the situations where those patterns are helpful versus harmful. Most people have cognitive preferences developed through their education, profession, and personal history. Metacognitive awareness involves noticing when your default thinking patterns aren't producing useful results and consciously switching to different approaches. If analytical thinking isn't solving a creative problem, recognize this quickly and shift to divergent thinking. If creative brainstorming isn't producing actionable solutions, switch to convergent evaluative thinking. Advanced metacognition involves understanding the conditions that optimize different types of thinking and deliberately creating those conditions when you need specific cognitive capabilities. The most sophisticated level of metacognition involves what some researchers call metacognition. Thinking about your thinking about thinking. This involves developing awareness of your metacognitive patterns and optimizing those patterns for different situations. You might notice that you tend to overanalyze decisions in certain contexts, underanalyze in others, or consistently miss certain types of considerations. This awareness allows you to develop personal thinking systems that compensate for your cognitive blind spots and leverage your cognitive strengths. Chapter 15, Sustaining This for Life. Here's the final piece. Mental superiority isn't something you achieve and then maintain effortlessly. It's a dynamic capability that requires continuous cultivation, deliberate practice, and systematic protection against the forces that naturally degrade mental performance over time. Understanding how to sustain and continue developing mental dominance throughout your life is what separates those who experience temporary improvement from those who build lasting transformation that compounds across decades. The first challenge is hedonic adaptation, your tendency to return to baseline levels of satisfaction and performance even after significant improvements. When you first develop better decision-making or emotional regulation, the improvements feel dramatic. But over time, these enhanced capabilities become your new normal, and you stop consciously maintaining them. This creates a risk that you'll unconsciously regress to previous patterns if you don't actively work to maintain your enhanced capabilities. Just as physical fitness deteriorates without continued exercise, mental fitness requires ongoing practice. Sustaining mental dominance requires building maintenance systems, structures, habits, and practices that preserve enhanced capabilities even when motivation fluctuates or competing priorities demand attention. These systems must operate automatically rather than depending on willpower. The foundation is regular mental training that continues challenging your cognitive capabilities. This might involve reading challenging material, engaging in complex problem solving, or seeking situations that test your emotional regulation under pressure. Maintenance training differs from initial skill development because it focuses on preserving and refining existing capabilities. It requires less intensity, but must be more consistent over longer periods. The key is identifying minimal effective doses, the smallest amount of practice that prevents decay while being sustainable indefinitely. Another essential component is environmental curation. Deliberately designing your surroundings, relationships, and information diet to support continued mental excellence. Your environment has enormous influence on your thinking quality. Most modern environments are optimized for comfort and entertainment rather than cognitive development. Environmental curation involves creating physical spaces that facilitate focused work. Organizing information so important materials are accessible while distractions are minimized. Social environment curation is equally important because the people you spend time with significantly influence your mental standards. Surrounding yourself with individuals who operate at high cognitive levels maintains pressure to continue improving. Engaging with people who challenge your thinking prevents intellectual stagnation. The long game, the ultimate goal of sustaining mental dominance, is creating cognitive flourishing, a state where your mental capabilities continue expanding throughout your life rather than just being preserved. Instead of fighting against decline, you structure your life to enable continued growth in wisdom, insight, and mental sophistication. Cognitive flourishing involves shifting focus from raw processing speed toward pattern recognition, judgment, and integration of knowledge across multiple domains. These capabilities often improve with age when properly cultivated. This long-term perspective changes how you approach daily choices. Instead of optimizing only for immediate performance, you make decisions that support decades of continued mental growth. Instead of treating mental development as a youth activity, you embrace it as a lifelong practice that becomes more important as you age. Final thoughts. Look, we've covered a lot of ground together: the Victory Operating System, belief reprogramming, strategic decision-making, anti-fragility, peak, performance, mental models, emotional mastery, compounding systems, social intelligence, mastery psychology, breaking plateaus, leadership, metacognition, and sustaining it all for life. But here's what I need you to understand. All of this information is completely worthless unless you actually apply it. Knowledge without application is just entertainment. And I didn't write this to entertain you. I wrote this to transform you. The mind that wins consistently isn't just superior today. It's designed to keep winning for the rest of your life. Not through luck, not through circumstances, through deliberate mental architecture that's been engineered for victory. You now have the frameworks. You have the strategies. You have the understanding. The only question left is whether you'll commit to implementing them consistently enough to experience their compound effects. Mental superiority is available to anyone willing to study how their mind works and deliberately upgrade their mental capabilities. The science is proven, the frameworks exist. The only variable is your commitment. So here's my challenge to you. Don't just consume this information and move on. Pick one framework we discussed, just one, and implement it this week. Really implement it, not halfway. Not when you feel like it, actually do it. Then next week, add another one and another. Build these capabilities one by one until they become automatic, until they become who you are. Because that's when everything changes. That's when you stop hoping for success and start engineering it. That's when you develop a mind that wins every single time. The choice is yours. Always has been, always will be. Now, go win.